as that was happening, were you going out to other bars as well at the time, or were you pretty much a 1270 person?
I was pretty much a 1270 person. I would go to Sporters occasionally, but then all of a sudden, Styx came along.
Yeah. Now I want to talk about that too, because I don't know much about Styx either.
Okay. Styx came along, and Danae had moved from Provincetown up to Boston, and as a matter of fact, him and Jimmy were roommates. Okay. And so they lived together. They worked in different clubs, but they collaborated constantly. Working on things and practicing, etc. And so Danae was playing at Styx, Jimmy was playing at 1270, and there were two, as far as I was concerned, there were two distinct sounds. Okay. Danae was definitely a little more edgier than Jimmy was. Okay. Jimmy, at that time, was creative to a point that he was doing things that no one had thought of doing, it seemed. Some of the overlays that he did. Nice and Slow by Jesse Green. At the break, he would go into the rap of from Gloria Gaynor's Casanova Brown, and then he would end up going back into Nice and Slow. It was incredible. One of these days I'm going to put that together and post it.
I actually, at some point, I think as a kind of an addition to the interview and all that stuff, I would love a playlist from that period, like of songs. Maybe we could put it up on Spotify or something.
Have you ever listened to the ones that I've posted on my?
I've actually listened to the
page?
Jimmy Stuard mix that you posted. You only had one, I think. You posted on SoundCloud. Was that you that posted a mix of his?
I have two of his. I have actually one tape that's split into two. Right. That's on my Podomatic page.
That's the one. I've listened to that.
Okay. But on my page, I did two sets called Stepped Back in Time 1 and 2. Okay. And back then, once I started to get into knowing what they were doing, I mean, I've had a musical background. I had 12 years of piano. And I've done other things too, musically. I conducted, arranged, etc. for musical theater back in college days. So I had a musical background to begin with. So I began to figure out what they were doing, But then I would buy these 45s, and I would try to do what they were doing. I started to try to do what they were doing in the radio station at the college at Bridgewater State.
So you were still going to Bridgewater State?
Oh yeah, definitely. And it was interesting too, because there was a kid at the radio station that had an R&B program. He had an R&B slot. And then I was coming in, and he's like, "What is this?" And I literally said that. I remember calling it. I said, "Bar music." I said, "I don't know what else to call it." He says, "Well, it's R&B." I said, "Yeah, but have you heard it anywhere?" He says, "No, I haven't." And he was incredibly fascinated by it. By this time, Jimmy Stewart was upstairs, but the only reason I remember, he was straight. And he needed to hear this music, and he says, "I need to come with you." So I brought him to the 1270. He was out of his mind. He just couldn't believe it. He danced. He didn't care.
Sure.
So it was interesting. To me, that was like kind of a shock that someone straight per se wanted to come to the 1270 and all of that. But blew him away. Totally blew him away. And I was always bringing him records. One time down in the when Jimmy was downstairs, I had the pleasure. A college trip of some sort. We went to New York, a theater trip, I'm sure it was, and I was walking by a record store in Times Square, and plastered in front of the window were all copies of First Choice, the Player LP. Now, Jimmy had been playing the Player from a 45, okay, and it had two sides to it. This is like, part one and part two. And I bought the album, and the album was like, the cut was like 6 or 7 minutes long, okay. And when I got back, I brought it into the 1270, and it was still downstairs in the back room, and as I walked in, I held up the album so he could see it from across the room, and he was like, gimme.
So he didn't.
He hadn't had it yet. No, and I gave it to him. And that I recall is sort of like my first, I may have asked Jimmy a few times, what was this song, what was that song, but then we really started to have more of a dialogue at that point, and I became more comfortable, talking with him, et cetera, about music.
Did you find him approachable in any way? Was he always a friendly guy?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Jimmy was a sweetheart. He really was. He was very, very approachable. No airs whatsoever to Jimmy. Well, he had airs, but they were funny airs. Right. They were enjoyable. They were part of his persona. Right. But they were never negative. Right. They were very grand. Right. That would be the best way to describe it.
So when you were going to other places, when you say when you went to Sporters, there was no DJ there yet either?
No.
Just a jukebox there?
Sporters at that time was just a stand-up bar. It was pretty much a neighborhood bar, a pickup bar, just a bunch of guys hanging out, although that phrase there should be reserved for Chaps later on, because later on Chaps' advertisement was Chaps, and underneath was this line that just said just a bunch of guys. Mm-hmm. And but that's sort of like what Sporters was. Right. Sporters wasn't a dance palace in any way, shape, or form.
So what year did Styx open then?
That's a good question. I'm going to say 74 or so, and I'm trying to figure out too right now what came first, whether or not it was Styx or Cabaret. Okay, because Cabaret was the biggest release, I think, for the gay community in Boston. I mean, it was huge. It was the old Boston Tea Party.
And that was, Bobby talked about Cabaret briefly. Where was that again?
That's what 15 Lansdowne is.
Oh, it is. Okay, so it is
15 Lansdowne Street. And Cabaret was just a cement cavern, with lights that just, here, there, it's whatever. There was no light show. There was a kaleidoscope thing that went on the wall, on the back wall. That was it. Okay, the DJ booth was really cool. The DJ booth was up above. Okay, it was a platform, and then there were these things to make it sort of look like a globe of some sort, just piping, with lights on it, and the DJs had to climb up a ladder in order to get to it. DJs that played there with Val, Jimmy Fournier, we miss him, he's gone. Jimmy Fournier was incredible. He knew so much about music and knew the music, and he was always a wonderful resource. He was a sweetheart too. Cabaret also then had a back room, okay, which later on became Rainbow Room and Spit and all those other clubs back there. Mm-hmm. That was the Cabaret showroom, okay, and the Cabaret showroom had acts like Craig Russell. Okay, this is like when Craig Russell was first starting out. Michael Greer, who was very funny. Do you know who Michael Greer is?
I do not.
Yeah, okay. Michael Greer was a great comedian. He actually played the MC in the drag bar in the Rose. Okay, he had on the white
So he's got a cameo in the Rose.
He had a cameo in the Rose, exactly. He used to do this act. That was too funny for words. There would be on stage Whistler's mother over here. No, Whistler's mother over here. Blue Boy on this side, and then a big frame in the middle, okay? And he would sit in it dressed like the Mona Lisa. And it was the museum after hours, okay? And I mean, I can't remember any of the jokes, but you'd be crying laughing as and Mona Lisa always had this kerchief that had something on it, and you should whip, Blue Boy with it or something, and just too funny.
So it was just the whole stage act.
Oh, it was definitely a stage act. And Glenn Elliott was a female impersonator who I think is still around, actually, along with Brandy Lee. Brandy Lee was, I'm pretty sure, I think she was full transsexual. Mm-hmm. Okay, and you never saw a more beautiful woman in your life. Okay, now we can peg this to being shortly after, obviously, the movie Cabaret. Okay, the club was called Cabaret. Glenn Elliott and Brandy Lee always used to start their show off with a couple of songs from the show, etc. Glenn Elliott he would, you know, this is the thing about back then. There were more impersonators that did impressions with jokes, etc. No lip syncing or anything like that.
It wasn't really the standard. Wasn't lip syncing.
No, not at all. Not at all. Not at all. And Glenn Elliott would be doing, you know, Katharine Hepburn and Carol Channing and Betty Davis. Oh, he used to crack me up. He used to do this bit of Betty Davis singing "Stop in the Name of Love," and I'm not going to embarrass myself by attempting that, but you can just guess
what that must have sounded like. Sure.
Yeah. And so there were others that performed there as well. Oh, Waylon Flowers, I believe, started out. It was one of his first gigs.
No kidding.
Was at Cabaret,
yeah,
as well. And Cabaret, okay, Jimmy Fournier, these are two things that I remember clearly about Jimmy and Cabaret specifically, okay, is he would get on the microphone and say, "Please, if you want to smoke grass, please go outside. We don't want the club closed." Okay, because there was always someone, you know, that was trying to light up or whatever. Later on, you know, then the straight people started to find out about Cabaret, and then they started to filter in. And it was sometimes okay, sometimes not so okay. And Jimmy gets on the microphone one night and says, "Remember, this is a gay bar. If you're straight, you're here as our guests and act accordingly."
That's funny.
And as only Jimmy could say it,
yeah,
too. And of course the crowd went nuts.
Yeah.
You know, when he said that, you
right,
know, it was like, yeah, you know, this is our place. This is our place.